We normally don't go around thinking about killing our entire family and our mother and then skipping town and remarrying and just carrying on like nothing happened. Is it just a human thing, or is there something there a little bit more to it, that maybe an energy or something that was involved that caused people to do these things?
Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, really appreciate it. This week I'm interviewing Misti Gaither. Now, Misty is from a world of people we've interviewed before, and that's in the world of paranormal. Misty is going to talk all about just her time in paranormal research. Just like the person I had on a few weeks ago, this one's a little bit different because it comes with a caveat, and that is she is a believer in using this paranormal ability to assist in criminal investigation. So she's going to talk about some of the cases that interest her the most, some of them from years past. She's going to talk about some of the cases that she's helped with when it comes to, trying to find answers for families in tragic situations. I'm going to talk about a case very briefly that actually had exhausted almost all the resources. The Green River Killer case. They even brought in some psychics. I don't know that it went anywhere, but I just thought it was interesting talking to Misty. The day that we talked about a month ago, and I had a busy day the day before. It was an early morning chat. She had just spent several days in a haunted place doing field work. So we both, I think, maybe we're a little tired. I think she did a great job. I think I rambled just a teeny bit. But I think that our conversation was really, really powerful. Anytime I can talk to somebody that talks about this type of thing, it's something that I don't necessarily have a huge opinion on, but I know that it's an interesting world, and when the true crime world and the paranormal world kind of combine, I knew that I had to have Misty on. So I think you're going to enjoy this one a lot. If you haven't already, go follow along with the podcast. I've had a lot of paranormal investigators and people on before, so if that's something you're interested in, you'll want to check those out. The only way to make sure that you don't miss out is go leave that 5-star review on Apple and on Spotify. Leave a written review on Apple. That helps a lot. Follow along on Instagram so you can see new episodes coming out, Not Enough Podcasts. But yeah, let's just get right to the interview. Here is Misti Gaither. Hey, Miss Gaither, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm good. Hardest question of the afternoon. Just introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Misti Gaither. I am the host of Quest, a Journey into True Crime and the Paranormal, a psychic medium, and a paranormal investigator.
I love it. And I guess I want to start out with, we had a conversation yesterday about making sure that, our times lined up. And you said that you, at the moment, was at a haunted house, for lack of better words. I know that you're home now, but I guess tell us a little bit about what you've been up to this weekend.
Sure. This weekend, we stayed and actually hosted an event at the Haunted Hotel in New Orleans. It is rumored to be the place where the Axeman of New Orleans stayed, 1918, 1919, when he went on his murderous rampage. And so they kind of cater to that. And it's actually, now whether I can say it's definitively the Axeman of New Orleans, no, of course I can't say that, but there definitely are several spirits there. And we had a wonderful investigation. I invited different people in the paranormal genre, had other psychic mediums, past life regression specialists, and different investigators. And so it was really a cool time for us just to, come together and just talk about all things paranormal, and then go on the quest to find the X-Man too.
So is this something that you do relatively frequently?
Yes, I try to. Yeah. Of course I have a day job, and I would love for this to be my day/night job also. But yeah, we investigate at least, a few times a month. So yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, you said that you were just getting home. It was a busy weekend. I guess, I don't know whether you've got a podcast or something coming out about it, but Did you succeed in whatever you were trying to do this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, we made contact with some spirit. We'll be going over the evidence and reviewing, and there's a lot to, since we were there from Friday evening until, Sunday morning, we have a lot to go over. So I'm kind of anxious to see what's, if we captured anything or, what's going on and what happened. And, there's so many people like looking forward to seeing what we caught.
That's awesome for sure. So let's kind of go all the way back to the beginning of your story when it comes to this stuff. Obviously, you were there because you have that psychic ability. I guess how did you realize that you possess kind of that skill?
I knew from an early age that I, was seeing things that not everyone else saw, hearing things, things coming in my mind that would happen, and I couldn't really explain it. And the way that I was raised very religious, and so it was looked on as being demonic to have those kind of gifts or to see, And so I always say whenever I'm asked that question, I always say I learned to shut up for a long time, and then about 5 years ago, I started I embraced my gifts and just really started actively using my gifts to help other people. My goal to even branch out more and, like maybe help solve some, unsolved cases and cold cases that we have. And I think it's very important when you have gifts like this that that you use it for a greater good and not just for monetary reasons, which, I don't, begrudge anybody from, of course, making a living or anything, because I do, charge for sessions and stuff. But I think that is really important that you give back in some way and to, be able to bring people peace and answers that they've been searching for. To me, that's a real honor to be able, to be chosen to do that.
So are you mostly doing kind of these one-on-one sessions with people that are wanting to, get answers when it comes to like loved ones, or are you mostly going into, I guess paranormal situations like this weekend and trying to use your gifts there, or is it a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. People will come to me to, they want to connect with their loved ones. And like I say, I consider myself like a bridge between the living and the dead because we don't always understand that not only, we want to know if grandma's okay or mom or whoever's passed over, is okay or not, but it's also important for the dead to get their messages relayed. And so it helps both sides.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to talk with you because I've talked to, a lot of people in the paranormal world. I've talked to a lot of people in the true crime world, but never somebody that's really mixing them together. So what made you, I guess, have that passion for not just each individual thing, but trying to find a way to, I guess, for the greater good, like you mentioned, to put those together?
Yeah, I've always been interested in both genres. I've always watched a lot of true crime and the paranormal, and it's just like it just came to me one day that these two, I don't know how to describe it. I don't know if you say worlds or two just different aspects that they can be successfully mixed together. And to be used, like I said, your gifts to help bring a resolution. It's not always easy to get people in the true crime, um, law enforcement in particular, to get them on board, about using psychics. And I do understand that because, I believe that there's a place for psychic mediums in law enforcement, but, I believe that they need to be vetted. They need to, have a good reputation and of course as accurate as possible. And I think that once that's done, I think that law enforcement needs to have more of an open mind and a willingness to listen and to use. I'm working on a case now here in New Orleans, and it was actually the episode was last week. It was dropped on my show, and it's an 8-year-old unsolved hit and run murder in the French Quarter. And unfortunately, the gentleman, it was New Year's Eve, and he was starting to cross the street, and a car hit him. And that's sad enough. But what really disturbs me and kind of, you have things that kind of haunt you. And he was drugged for 8 miles under the car
Mm,
before he was dislodged.
mm.
And to me, that just personally, I can't imagine his parents, his friends, his loved ones going 8 years and knowing that that crime hasn't been solved.
Mm. Yeah, and you talked about kind of the mixture of the two, and the hope that that law enforcement can embrace at least those that are doing it the right way. I just wonder, um, what does that look like now? When I've looked at true crime documentaries and stuff, I've heard cold cases, and then the family hiring somebody just as a last resort. But do you see actual law enforcement ever involving people that I guess claim to possess these gifts?
Yes, there are cases where it has happened. Um, there was a show, I don't know, it was on years ago. It was called Psychic Investigators. And I actually had the honor of having Nancy Weber. She is a psychic investigator in New Jersey. And she actually helped solve a few cases up there. But she had people in law enforcement that knew her, that knew of her reputation, and they reached out to her. So, I'm sure that sometimes it does happen, and maybe, it's not publicized because, even though people now are opening up more about the paranormal and believing more about, spirit, but there's still somewhat of a stigma. So it's just something that's, needs to be worked on, and needs to have more of a reputable, people that are wanting to be involved. And so that's very important to me that gets, done. And it will not be overnight, and it's not going to happen this week, and probably not next week. But you just keep pushing, and I think that one day that we will see a difference in that.
And do you see that as something that is working hand in hand in active cases, or is it more like a cold case last resort type thing? What how do you see it? And I'll explain why I asked that here in a minute.
Sure. It would be great for both, but I think that me personally, that law enforcement, they have their place, and they have their things that they follow, procedures and things that they need to do, and but I feel that when everything else is exhausted, then I think I don't see the harm in trying just one more thing. And then if it doesn't work, then I think that you can lay your head down at night and say, well, I did try everything.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that at least in some cases, definitely some of the bigger, really really cold cases, that is kind of sometimes what law enforcement does, just because I had someone on. Oh goodness, it's almost been 2 years ago. Dave Reichert, who eventually became a congressman, but beforehand he was the lead investigator for the Green River Killer, and that was obviously something that expanded over 30 plus years, and he mentioned that we were trying everything possible. We even accepted psychics that came in and wanted to explain things. In that case, he said, nothing came of it. All of it was just kind of a goose chase, but when things go that cold, I do think that law enforcement is at least open to not shutting it completely down, which is, I guess, the best you can hope for sometimes. But it kind of goes into the next side, and that's where I know that you have some cold cases that are, I guess, particularly near and dear to you. I want to talk a little bit about some of those. The two that you mentioned in your text yesterday, I didn't know anything about either one of them. I'm not, this isn't a true crime podcast, so that's not the only thing we deal with. But I looked them both up. Both of those are very, very interesting. So maybe pick one of those two and tell us a little bit more about that. It was John List and Mary Jo Fonders, the two you mentioned.
Yes. Now, those are solved cases, and they were just
Mhm.
examples of
Yeah.
some of the cases that I, watching about or learning more about. And it's the John List case. I mean, that was solved a while back, and
Mhm.
just the the gravity of it, killing your entire family and your mom to boot. I mean, like, how does someone do that? Like, when you try to think about the mind, I mean, they don't think like us. They don't, we normally don't go around thinking about, killing our entire family and our mother and then skipping town and remarrying and just carrying on like nothing happened, and it's just a sad case where, he was, kind of shamed that he didn't have a job, but then he didn't know if he just did the one thing of kind of looking up at his house and had like 100,000 or something Tiffany window that he could have sold, and it would have helped him with all his debt. And he lost his job, and instead of maybe trying to be a little bit more proactive, he just, well, let me just kill everybody and call it a day.
Hmm. Yeah, and that one kind of reminded me the most of I mean, in a different way, but the Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer area, because he was able to assimilate so well into society where, there's a lot of times when people are finally caught, it doesn't go 30 plus years. I think with John List, it looked like it went 17 years, but it doesn't work that well because, once people are caught, it's like, oh yeah, he was always kind of the strange guy, or I always thought there was something a little off about that person, but it didn't seem
Right.
like with John List or with Gary Ridgway, they kind of just lived very normal lives. The same way with the BTK killer, they all just kind of lived very, very normally, which kind of throws off the whole, s- it's just hard for people to grasp those, and I think that's why they get so big because you think that all these people are going to be the people living in their parents' basement and doing crazy stuff, but a lot of times they're just living a normal life. You said John List got remarried, so not only did he marry one person, but a second person, found him desirable. So I that's always just an interesting thing when that can happen. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I even have a question to that, but those are the ones that interest me the most.
Yeah, and if you think about it, let's go back to the Green River Killer and even BTK. And if you think about it, they both had times where they stopped killing. And to me, that's kind of interesting because law enforcement's always saying, okay, well, once you start killing, you can't stop, and they'll just stop until they're caught. But they had that wherewithal or whatever that kind of controlled that urge in them to kill. They were able to kind of subdue that for a while, especially Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. I think he went for a long time without killing, and then he kind of, oh, let me taunt the police again, and use my floppy disk, and the rest is history because he got caught by trying to have that last hurrah of trying to be smarter than everybody else in the room.
Yeah, yeah, and when these cold cases go for so long, the interesting thing when I've talked to police in that world is a lot of times when it comes to serial killers, just like you said, they don't necessarily stop. So when things slow down, you got to think, okay, or slow down or stop. You think maybe that they either got apprehended for something else, or they're not necessarily in the up and up, so maybe they got themselves killed, stuff like that. But it's interesting when it lasts 30 plus years, where you've got to think, did either one of those things happen, or are they simply just aging at this point and not able to do those things anymore? So that kind of just, because you don't, when you think of these people that are doing these things, you forget that you know they're people and they're aging as well, and they can't do these things anymore. So I thought that was really interesting when Dave Reichert was talking about that, how they had to decide whether does this person, did they stop, did they get apprehended, or are they just getting older and now we need to start thinking about an older person in this role. So I don't know. It's an interesting world to me. I guess the next thing I want to ask you about is just in your profile, you talked about how you've got a few cases that really affected you a lot, and maybe you already talked about that, and then one that is your, I guess, dream case to work on. Let's tackle the first one. What's some of the cases that affected you the most?
Well, I think that the case that kind of an answer to both of those points is,
Hmm.
the case that affects me a lot is the Josh Woodruff case that I mentioned earlier about being drug under the car, and they have a picture of the camera footage of the car, the actual car. They have a composite drawing of the alleged person. They actually have witnesses on the street that saw it happen. Okay. And you have to consider, I don't know if you've ever been to the French Quarter or whatever, but the streets are, they're narrow. It's not like you have 3 or 4 lanes going through the French Quarter. I mean, there's one-way streets, and I'm thinking, okay, in New Year's Eve, it was, I'm sure, very crowded. And so you're just wondering, only 2 people saw this? There was nobody else along the way who was going up one-way streets wrong. And, it's like no one else saw these, our tax dollars. We paid all this money to have these cameras, and yet we can't even tell. They can't even tell what model the car is. It's just a black car. They don't know. There's some debate on what it actually is. It's easy to blame law enforcement, and I think that's one thing that we as humans were quick to do is, well, they didn't do this and they didn't do that, and sometimes that's pretty true that they didn't. But I also think that it's a responsibility that we have as citizens, that if we see something, we should say something. And I know people have seen things, and that could help a lot of these unsolved crimes. And it's, and I wonder why that people, why don't they say something? Well, it has to do with, maybe they're scared. Maybe they don't want to get involved. I mean, there's 3 reasons. They're scared, they don't want to get involved, or they don't give a damn. So it's like we're quick to point the finger, but then what are we doing what are we doing personally to make things better or to help in the situation? It has to be a joint effort with the public and law enforcement to get these crimes solved. That's one of the cases that sticks out to me. Like more mainstream cases that are not necessarily local to New Orleans, maybe tied in. I don't know. I do a lot of research. I don't know why, but I do a lot of research on like axe murders. The Axeman, that's like 1918, 1919. But then you go up to Villisca in Iowa, and it's called the Villisca Axe murders, and that's also another unsolved homicide where 6 children and 2 adults were killed in 1912. And it just kind of baffles me. They had a neighbor very close, that lived very close to their home, and I'm thinking, she didn't hear anything. She noticed the next day, oh, they're not up doing chores, but then she didn't hear anything during the night of 8 people getting, axed to death.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that is kind of the stress on of law enforcement when it comes to these things, because any time that I talk to somebody from law enforcement that does has dealt with a cold case, or one that took a long time, you do have that public pressure, and people feeling like what they the particular thing didn't matter to them, and that kind of thing. Again, Green River, the people didn't feel like it mattered as much to law enforcement because of the people that were getting killed. It was, mostly people that lived on the streets, and prostitutes. So it causes that extra stress too. And I think that's just kind of the crux of it when it comes to these things, where you've got a lot of pressure on law enforcement not to make the wrong decisions. I mean, look at another case that I've dealt with that I hate to even call true crime given what happened, but the Amanda Knox case is the opposite. They felt so much pressure to arrest somebody that they arrested the wrong person. So it's really, really, I don't envy law enforcement at all for what they have to do, for sure. When it comes to that axe murders, I do wonder what's created your interest so much in that. And then of course, again, talking about people that I've talked to, one of the paranormal people I talked to that was on a paranormal show, I think it was Mysteries Decoded or something like that. She actually did a reading in the Lizzie Borden house, which of course is probably the biggest axe murder case there is. So have you had a chance to I don't know where it is. It's on the East Coast. Have you had a chance to get up there? And then I'm sure quite a bit about that case. if you know axe
I do.
murders.
I do. It's in Fall River, Massachusetts, and actually, that is, that case was in 1892, and I'm actually friends with. He is a direct descendant of the Lizzie Borden family, and he is a clairvoyant. Did Lizzie do it? I mean, there's always the question: is she the one that really did it, or did something make her do it, or no, was it the uncle, or no, was it the maid? And I mean, no one knows, and it's like, she was found innocent. They brought her to trial, and then she was found innocent. So sometimes I think, well, maybe that some of these murders are connected. There's a theory out there about the railroad. They'd hop on the railroad, because especially back then, was one of the major ways to travel. Hop on the train and go on to the next city, and no one would be more the wiser. They weren't worried about DNA, or they didn't even know anything about it. Is it just a human thing, or is there something there a little bit more to it, that maybe an energy or something that was involved that caused people to do these things? And I mean, it's just, the Lizzie Borden case. I mean, that is, I don't know, it's just so much that once you try to wrap your brain around it all, it gets kind of overwhelming. You're trying to solve something that was over, 100 and something years ago. And it's like, if they had the forensics and stuff back then, would it be solved? I don't know. Would any of these be solved? It could be.
For sure. And I want to kind of put on, for the listeners, because, all kinds of listeners listen to this, and it's not, like I said, it's not a true crime podcast, not a paranormal podcast. So I always like to kind of put that skeptic's hat on for those who are, listening and do feel that way. So you've talked about your abilities. You mentioned just now, a descendant of Lizzie Borden, being clairvoyant. I've talked to a lot of other people. So, listen to this podcast. It sounds like everyone has some kind of psychic ability, and I've heard other people mention that, and I've seen that is a question that you like to answer too, and that is, most people do have some kind of ability, at least if you are open to that, and that's your belief, that a lot of people do have that ability. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I do believe that. I think everybody has some kind of level of psychic. I mean, some people call it intuition. You hear about mother's intuition. I even believe that profilers, FBI profilers or whatever, that they have to have some kind of psychic abilities. I mean, because some of them has nailed it down to the color of the car that the perpetrator would be driving, or what they would look like, or where they would work. Now, how would you know that? I mean, you just lucky guess every time. I don't want to believe that everything is, oh, it has a ghost, or oh, it has a spirit. I'm not that way. But sometimes when things can't be explained any other way, like you go through the normal channels, and you're like, okay, well, it doesn't fit into this box. It's not, the usual. Then what is it? I think that, like you say, you have a gut feeling. What is that? Is that another word for just having a psychic intuition, for being maybe, like you have some people that are more sensitive to other people's feelings, and that they can empathize, oh, you're having a bad day, they can feel that from you. And so what is causing that? Is it just we all have it, and just some choose to maybe educate themselves more about using their gifts and develop them? Or is it just some people are blessed more with having handle on what that they feel and think and see, and how it's relayed to someone else?
Yeah, and a lot of people that are skeptic about this type of thing, they do bring their own, religious aspects into it. You mentioned earlier about being, coming from a very religious household, that some of this, seemed, satanic, for lack of a better word. So how do you mirror the two? How do you mesh the two when it comes to these type of abilities and religion?
I believe in God, and I'm a religious person. And because I think of it as a gift, I think of it as a gift from God. And, of course, there's skeptics. And am I skeptical of some things too? Sure, I am. But like I said, everything, perception and how that you present yourself is everything. You go in and you act like you know everything, and when you don't, and you're just, oh, I have these gifts. And it's just how that you personally, how you take responsibility for your gifts and what you do with them is what is the key. People, I could bring John List or whomever in here, right here on this interview with me, and have them sit beside me if I could, and say, okay, I'm, John List, whatever, and there would be someone who would not believe it, and no matter what, because that they adhere to their beliefs, they believe to their mindset, and nothing's going to change them. I'm not here to change people or to make them believe in me and what I do. I can only be reputable. I can only be responsible for my actions and what I do. And if it changes someone's mind, or maybe not even change their mind, but maybe for a moment for them to think, oh, okay, well, maybe there is another way. Maybe everything's not, black and white. Everything's not cut and dried. Maybe that there is another, something else out there, then I think that's would be very, like that would be a goal of mine, and it would really complete me to, like to have that reputation of maybe having someone to kind of rethink things. And, like I said, I'm not here to change anyone's mind or to make them to think bad of them because they don't believe. Everybody has their right to believe and or to not believe.
Yeah. So what the things that you do, what does that look like exactly? You just mentioned, I think it was just kind of an example, but bringing in somebody that, from that died in the 1980s that was a serial killer. Is this what does this look like? Is it you getting energy from these families and then honing in their people? I mean, obviously I'm trying to make sense of it for people who are skeptics. So I don't assume you're just saying that you could just randomly bring any dead person in at any moment that you want to.
No, I can't. you know, um, I mean, I haven't never tried to bring any, like John Lester or anyone like that in, but like when I'm asked to do a reading, or to connect with the loved ones, or like I said, reputation and perceptions, everything, especially in this the psychic medium line of work, because to me, if someone is 100% accurate every single time, that kind of like puts up, I don't know, like a red flag or something for me, because no matter if you have these gifts, you're still human. You're still going to make mistakes. And so, I think about that too. But I think it's important that when you're contacted to do readings or to help with this or help with that, that you maintain a high level of, no researching. It's easy, like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do and look and find out, oh, okay, well, his mom's name was, I don't know, Roberta, and you go back, oh, okay, we had a grandpa. That would get you a little ways, like, oh my God, she knew my grandmother was Roberta, but how long with you being deceptive and not being honest? Always. I mean, the psychic mediums that have done this have been found out and they lose everything. And to me, it's better to, like, right off the jump, to be respectful, responsible, in your gifts, and then that way nobody can say anything. That, I mean, they can say, oh, well, she's just, she's making that up, or she must have done that. And like I said, it doesn't matter. If I didn't have any way of finding out any, like, just, like I said, looking up or whatever, to the person who's not going to believe and be skeptic, you could put me in a room with no windows and no walls and no electricity or no way, and they will still believe that it's not true, that somehow that, something happened, that this information got to me, or somebody fed. So it's just, you got to be true to yourself. And then once you do that, then everything else falls into place of what you're supposed to be doing. And so, like I said, it doesn't matter what you do, there will always be someone out there that's not going to believe. And so I just accepted it as that's the way that it is. And I just have to worry about me, and have how I handle my business and my reputation, and all the other things will fall into place.
Mm. Yeah. Last question I have when it comes to the psychic world, and that was, I had someone on about 6 months ago now that was their full time job. That they are, a psychic, and they were talking about, ways, because we talked about, the good psychics that are out for good and the people that are out just to make money and be deceptive. So since then, when I do talk to somebody that talks about having abilities, I always ask this question because that's what she said, is a huge thing to figure out whether people are being deceptive. And that is, you mentioned that you don't always get everything completely right. And then maybe, in certain reading things, you just aren't clicking. You're not getting things, or the person's just not happy with what you're getting. When that happens, um, what do you do? Is that something where you're comfortable saying, sorry, it didn't work out, here's your money back, or not?
When that happens, sometimes there's a block in the person where they're skeptic, and some people don't always come to you with true intentions. Some people come to you wanting for you to fail, or wanting you to not connect, just so that they can be okay within themselves and say, well, I knew it wasn't okay. Sometimes when you do a reading, like, you get information, and they're like, at the time, no, I don't have an Ethel. I don't know any Ethel in my family. And I'm like, okay. And I always tell them, you know what, just put it on a shelf. Then they'll come back to me, I mean, just about every single time. Oh, I got to thinking about it, and you were right. I did have a great aunt Ethel. We called her something, and I forgot that was her real name, or whatever the case may be. So that's just what I do, because you have to be um, comfortable in your abilities, and it's like, okay, this came to me, like for an example, I was doing a reading, and she wanted to connect with her mother, and I kept getting this flash of a Sears catalog. Back in the day, you had the Sears catalog where you looked and ordered for Christmas, and I could just see, like, someone just rifling through the Sears catalog. Well, I was like, well, that's kind of weird, and I didn't want to say anything because at the time I was kind of just starting out, and I was like, she's gonna think I'm weird. The Sears catalog, what does that mean? So, and then I remember, my mentor, Carrie Roy, she's the New Orleans psychic medium, and I remember her telling me, when you get things, just say it, because it has a meaning. And so I told the lady, I said, I know this sounds weird, but for some reason, I just keep seeing somebody going through a Sears catalog. And she looked at me and she's like, my mother worked at Sears. And I was like, oh, okay. I said, then so where did that come from? Did I just like, oh, Sears, just pull it out of the sky? No. But if I hadn't have said what I felt or saw, then she wouldn't have known that I was connecting with her mother. I would have done an injustice for not saying. And even though it sounded weird to me, or I was kind of like, oh, like I said, like, oh, that they might think I'm kind of crazy, or not knowing what I'm doing, or but I had to, I was like, no, I'm saying what I got. And then you have the message. If you're the messenger and you're relaying it, you know you're the go between. You're not the one coming up with the messages, you're giving the message. And so you're not going to be wrong, because you're just relaying what's given to you. It's up to the person who's receiving it, what they do with it.
So have you not had any instances where, things aren't connecting, that I guess that you've honed your skill well enough that that doesn't happen?
I can't never say I haven't never, like, missed on something, of course, like I said, I'm human. Like, I had thought I had a name, and so far, like I said, it doesn't happen very often at all, but there are times. And so I don't ever want to portray myself as, I'm completely right, and you have to believe me, and, everything I say is right, because I'm telling you, no one is 100%. You have geniuses and different people in different professions and stuff, and you're gonna make some errors along the way, not intentionally, but because you're human. It will eventually happen. But to say someone all the time is 100% accurate, no, I cannot believe that. But I believe that as you have these gifts, that it is your responsibility to be as accurate, and to the message, how you portray it, how you give the message, It is, you got to be as accurate as you can relaying these messages.
Gotcha. Yeah, I want to, I guess, close the chapter on that, and then ask a final question when it comes to the paranormal world, and that is, again, putting the skeptic's hat on in that world, and that is a lot of people, when I've talked to people about paranormal and those who don't necessarily believe, they say, look at all these TV shows. It's all just for entertainment. It's just none of it's real. It's all just fake for entertainment. So do you feel like, these shows, because there's certainly a lot of them that are just for entertainment, and they have proven to not be accurate. Do you think the world of paranormal TV helps or hurts the cause? I mean, obviously it brings it much more to the forefront for people, but it also kind of looks like just a scary movie basically. So is it helping or hurting things?
I think it does both. I think that if people knew, actually would go on paranormal investigations, things don't happen all in like a little nice, neat bow. Sometimes you have to sit there for hours just to get like a response. Sometimes it's not like it always is, because you have to think, well, they have editing now. And then would we want to watch a show where they're sitting there for 3 or 4 hours? Just roll the tape. Let's sit here for 3 or 4 hours while they do no editing or anything. And then, finally 3 hours later, you get like a EVP, or you get a shadow or whatever you get, like, oh, and then can you imagine just sitting there watching a show and like we're going to hour number two? No, they're still sitting here asking questions. I think it's the show's responsibility and also the viewer's responsibility because, oh no, we want accuracy. We want it real. We want it real. But then would you really sit there for 4 hours just to, like, would you watch a show where it would take like all weekend to get like maybe one response? Of course
Mhm.
not. You're not going to sit there and watch 48 hours straight of somebody, just getting a one word something. Do I think things should be faked? No. But then, not at all. I don't think that that's correct. But then, you have to have some kind of entertainment value of the show uh, to get people to watch. So, like I said, it kind of goes hand in hand with each other, uh, you know, of what is expected and should be done.
So yeah, no, I agree with that, and that's what I've heard from a lot of people in the paranormal world that I asked that same question to. It is understandable that things don't happen quickly, and it's the viewer's responsibility to understand that. And I think that's kind of what makes a good show versus a bad show. It's those who sh- tell people that too, because there are some shows that present it as this all happened in 30 minutes, where in reality they were there for a week with all these different things happening. There's shows that actually tell you that, hey, this investigation's over a course of a weekend, or it's over a week. And there's ones that just act like everything's action packed, and they walk in and they get slapped in the face immediately. So I think I think that's the difference between the good and the bad shows. Well, I assume that you would agree.
I do agree with that.
Yeah. So let's shift now to your podcast, because I've said several times in this interview, I don't just deal with paranormal. I don't just deal with true crime. If people are listening to this and be like, yeah, I wish you did deal more with that, I think your podcast is a pretty good medium for that. You branch out a little bit. You talked to my friend Dwayne Searney recently, and he talks a little paranormal, but he also has a really thriving antique business. So you do a lot more than just that, but yours is a little bit more focused on that world. So talk about Quest, if you would.
Okay, sure. Yeah, it's called Quest. It's a journey into true crime and the paranormal. And the reason I call it, the journey part is because, I feel like I am on a journey um, to find out more. I don't pretend I know everything about paranormal and the true crime. So I like talking with guests who bring to the table different aspects of each part and can kind of, help me understand more, help the listeners, I'll say, to learn more about what's going on. I really enjoy doing it, and I just consider myself blessed to get to do this.
And I'll tell you, a moment of levity about all of it is because I've seen you in some of these interviews. I've watched some of your interviews with people, and I came here in, just coming from outside in my t-shirt. I was really worried you're going to come here in your suit because you dress real sharply in your interviews. So I was like, oh no, is she going to come out in a suit and I'm going to be wearing this t-shirt? You're still dressed way nicer than me, but you didn't put on the tie today, so I appreciate that.
No, I gave the tie a rest today. Well, actually, because I asked you, I said, "Well, is this going to be video or audio?" And you were like, "The audio," and I was like, "Yes, I don't have to wear the tie because if it had been audio, I'd have went around and put it, But I just do it as I guess that's what do they call it? Your aesthetic. And like when I'm going to different events or whatever, I'll wear my suit coat and the tie, and I just do it as I guess to form of respect, I guess, for my guests and listeners, and I don't know, that's my thing, and I like to do the different color ties, and I appreciate you noticing that. But yeah, that's funny that I don't have that on today. Sorry.
No, I like it. It was working for you for sure. So, in wrapping things up, tell people how they're going to connect with you. Obviously, the podcast. Shout out all those spots. If there's other connection points, just shout everything out if you would.
Sure. You can find me on YouTube, and you can go to at Quest 504 to subscribe. It'll take you right to the channel. Appreciate it. For any subscriptions, as always, we like those numbers. And I'm on Facebook, Misti Gaither, and I really appreciate the honor of being on your show. I've enjoyed our conversation, and I do thank you for that.
Oh yeah, I appreciate you joining me. It's been a pleasure. So that was Misti Gaither. I hope you enjoyed that one. I know I did. To follow along with her, check out her podcast. All the links to that will be in the show notes. She's doing some amazing things. I've listened to her podcast myself, and she's had some really, really awesome people on. She's a great interviewer, so I think you're going to enjoy that one too. So urge you to check that out. Urge you to follow along with Misty. If this is your first time listening to this podcast or you haven't already, go leave that 5-star rating on Apple and on Spotify. Leave a written review on Apple. That really helps. Go follow along Instagram, Not in a Huff Podcast, Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff on Facebook, jacksonhuff.com. Lots of places to follow along. Make sure you don't miss out on all future interviews and over 200 previous ones. If you go back and check those out, definitely appreciate that for sure. But we'll see you next week. Take it away, Chris.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or, hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.